Hey everybody, and welcome to my video on the Green-o-Matic, which is actually called the Petri Color-corrected Super 2.8. There's also a 1.9 version which is similar, has a slightly different interface element, a couple of them. This is the video for the 2.8. This is a fixed lens rangefinder camera. It has no light meter on it. Shutter speeds from 1 second up to 1/300th of a second, and bulb. The viewfinder frame coverage covers 100% and a little bit more of the actual frame, with markers in here to let you know what's going to be on the film. And the frame screen is illuminated with a green image border that moves to compensate for parallax. And the viewfinder screen is illuminated by a green border that is lit up through the front here, and that frame on the viewfinder screen adjusts as you focus to eliminate the parallax error that would exist normally. And it has a flash sync here that syncs at any shutter speed, because that's how leaf shutters function. The Petri 2.8 CCS is the budget model of an advanced level camera, and it has high-grade optics, very nice styling and nice appointment. And one way you can tell that it's designed for advanced users is that the manual provides very little basic operating information and is mostly technical specs and data. The Petri was produced by Kuribayashi in Japan from 1958 until 1961. This model specifically was produced in that time frame. It was preceded by the Petri 2.8, and it was concurrent with the f1.8 and f1.9 versions of this camera, and then followed later by the Petri EBN. So if you have your Petri CCS 2.8, let's take a look at the camera's features and the interface elements on the camera. We'll start with the top, though technically on the sides here are the strap lugs, and this is what you would use to attach the camera strap with. This is the film rewind knob and film rewind lever that folds out of it. This line right here is the film plane indicator. Here is the accessory shoe. It is not a hot shoe for a flash. It does not have an electronic contact. It's just a shoe that's for holding accessories, or you can hold a flash in there and connect the flash to the PC port. Here we have the ISO setting dial, or ASA as they called it back then. It's just a memo dial. It does not actually control anything in the camera. There's no light meter that this interfaces with. The black is for black and white film, and the red is for color film. What you would do is put the arrow to the correct ISO, and if it was color film, you just have to rotate it around until the red arrow pointed at the correct ISO. And it says ASA, but ASA and ISO are the same thing. This is the shutter release button right here, and here is the film advance lever and the frame count dial right here. This has to be manually reset when you install new film in the back of the camera. This also has a guard around the shutter release that you would unscrew, and then this uses the old type, or the Nikon type, of shutter activation cord that screws in around the shutter button instead of into the shutter button. And then when you're not using it, you can put the guard back on, and the guard is a very, very nice trim element if it's going to thread correctly. Is it? There it is. Okay. And it looks very nice. Here we are on the front of the camera, and up here we have the range finding windows. This is the viewfinder window. There's light that goes straight through this to your eye. Here is the viewfinder frame in the middle, and this is illuminated through this green window, projects the green frame onto a mirror so that it appears in this window when you look through it from the back. And here is the rangefinder window. This picks up a secondary image, projects it through a mirror system so that you see it overlapped in part of the frame in your range finding window. This is the lens focusing lever, and it's what you do to focus closer or further to get your subject into focus. On the top of the lens, we can see a little bit more of what's going on here. Here we have the shutter speed selection dial, which is what you would use to select your shutter speed. Here is the aperture selection dial that you would use to select your aperture. This is the M and X switch, and this is the type of flash setting that you would use. So there are two types of flashes that this can use, M or X flashes. You should leave it set to X in as much as possible because M flashes are basically extinct. They haven't made the bulbs in a very long time. Any flash that you would buy today, which can plug in through this PC port, is an X-type flash. Here we have, behind the aperture ring, we have the hyperfocal distance or zone focusing scale, depending on how you would like to use it. So I'm going to show you how to read that right now while we're talking about it. Do you see where it has 22? Let's zoom this out a little bit. You see how it says 22, 16, 8, and 2.8, and then the same numbers going the other way. Those correspond with the aperture setting here on this dial. So let's say we're going to set it to f8, and we'll focus it about like this, where 4.5 feet is what's in optimal focus, but this is also telling us that everything from about 3.4 feet to about 6 feet will be in focus. So that's your focus zone. It goes from the number to the number that is your aperture. So let's say that you wanted to get the most in focus that you could. You could set infinity to f22, your aperture to f22, and now everything from infinity to as close as about 4 feet will be in focus. And that's a pretty extreme hyperfocal distance right there. That's basically the entire world. But you could set it and just know that whatever you focus it at, you will have in focus what's between the lines that correspond with your aperture number. Down here on the front of the lens, we have the flash PC socket, and that's what the flash actually plugs into when you want to use a flash with this camera. On the back of the camera, there's not a whole lot to see. We have the film back right here that's going to open up to allow us to access the film compartment and the rangefinder window that you would look through as you're going to frame and focus your image. Next thing here we have on the bottom, we have the film rewind button and the tripod bushing. On the side of the camera right here, we have the film back latch, which is on the bottom, and you just pull it down to access the inside of the camera. And here we are inside of the camera. This is the film cassette chamber. This is where you would put the film to load it before taking your photos. These four silver rails are the film guide rails. The outer two keep the film from moving up and down as it progresses through the camera, because the film will nest in between it. These inner two work with the film pressure plate, which we'll see in just a second, to sandwich the film so that it stays flat and the image focuses properly on it. This opening is the camera obscura, and the lens opens up with the shutter when you take a picture, and then the image is placed on the film there. This is the film take-up sprocket. This keeps tension on the film so that it doesn't move backwards once you've taken a picture, because there is some spring tension built into the film when it's in the cassette because of having it coiled up and it developing memory, as plastic tends to do. This also helps to feed the film through the camera so that it stays properly aligned and moves evenly. This is the film take-up spool, and when you advance the film is taken up on that spool. You can see right there. Here's the camera's door. This is the film pressure plate that I was talking about, and this is the part that sandwiches onto the back of the film guide rails to keep the film flat. And here's a little spring that nests up against the cassette here so that it stays in proper alignment, loading the film through the camera. So before we get into the actual operations, some notes on this camera. In late 1959 or early 1960, the CCS shutter was upgraded from a 1/300th MX to a 1/500th MXV, the V being a self-timer, so a faster shutter speed and a self-timer. Now this camera was only made until 1961, so if your camera has the upgraded shutter, then it was produced during the last year of this camera's production, or the last year and a half or 2 years, depending on, I don't know exactly when this went out of production in 1961. There were some models that had a commemoration plaque on the top up here, and they are apparently very rare. Every source I read said, oh, these are so rare, oh my gosh. And that models without it, like this one, are extremely common. Now, that said, when I was researching this camera, I found tons of photos of models that had the commemorative plate, and very few that didn't have it. I don't know how much I trust those sources that say that the commemorative plate ones are extremely, extremely rare. They might be, but the preponderance of photos I found showed the commemorative plate. Frankly, I'd rather have the one without, because I don't think the commemorative plate photos have the film plane indicator right there. Okay, so with the film back open, let's load some film here. And the first thing you want to do is lift up the film knob there. I'm going to drop the cassette into the chamber and lower the film knob in place. Let's pull out a leader and advance this until this slot appears. Slide that in and hook it onto the little hook in the film spool slot. Advance it. Now, one thing I'm not sure about is whether or not this advance is supposed to lock until the shutter is pushed. I honestly don't know. If you have one of these, if you could let me know in the comments whether or not your film advance just goes willy-nilly, whether or not the shutter has been pushed or not, that would be great. Because I think the shutter is supposed to be released before the film advance goes, but so once you've loaded the film, then you would close the film back. You would reset your film dial so that the start is aligned with this little white dot right there. So you can see the little white dot that the start points to. Now you'll want to set your ISO reminder just to remind you of what type of film you have. Advance the film a few frames until that white dot is at the number 1, like it is. And now you're ready to go shoot some photos with this camera. In real life, you would not do what I just did. You would not open up the camera back when you have film in it. Film is one and done. If you open up the camera back like that, any photos you've taken are ruined. So when you load the film, you close the back, you take your entire 36 or 24 exposure roll of film and rewind it, and then you can open up the film back. But I did this to show you what happens inside the camera when you take a picture. So you've lined up your picture, you've done your settings, you hit the shutter button, and you advance the frame, and you can see that the film is taken up over here on this side. And unlike most cameras, this spool wraps the film in the same curl that it's coming off of the camera with. And that's a pretty nice feature because it makes it just a little bit easier for the camera to pull the film, and it doesn't bend the film in weird directions. So you take all of your film, and when you're done, you'd want to rewind the film. The film rewind button is on the bottom, and you rewind it by holding it down and rewinding. If you let go, the rewind button unlocks it back into place. When you're rewinding your film, and remember, don't open your film back until you're done rewinding your film because it will ruin all of your exposures. But this is what happens when you rewind the film. Here's the sound to listen for to let you know that you're almost done rewinding your film. And then you just have to crank it a couple more times and your film will be rewound. In real life, you would want to rewind the film entirely and then take it off to be developed or develop it yourself. So this has one flash sync port on the side right here, and it is an X flash. A standard modern electronic flash of any type will work as long as it has a cable connector that can connect to that port. If it doesn't, you can get a cable to hot shoe connector and then connect the flash to the hot shoe and the cable there. But any flash will work, and this camera syncs at any flash speed because it's a leaf shutter. And leaf shutters, no matter the speed that they operate at, have to open up completely and then close again. One thing about this camera that people might find difficult or off-putting is that it has no light meter, but that's really okay because for many decades, people didn't have light meters for their photography. So I'm going to show you how to use this camera with the Sunny 16 rule. And basically what that means is if you take a picture of a subject that's illuminated in full sun, then at f16 your shutter speed should be your film speed. So if you have 100 ISO film and you're using the Sunny 16 rule, you would put your shutter speed to 1/100th and your aperture to f16, and now you would properly expose a subject that is in full sun. So here we are looking through the viewfinder of the Petri CCS, and you can see those green frames that I had told you about around the image. There we go. You can also see in the center there that there is a ghostly image that is the same thing but overlaid, and that is your focusing image. So as you focus and get closer to being in focus, those two images come together. Now I'm actually too close to this to get them to come together entirely, but you get the idea, seeing how it works right there. Way out of focus, less out of focus, less out of focus. And so that is how you focus a rangefinder looking through the rangefinder window. So let's take everything we've just learned and put it together into the process of taking a photo with this camera. So first thing you need to know is your ISO. Okay, great. It's 1/100th of a second, and I'm going to take a picture of something in full sun. So f16. Well, that's really a little bit too much for me. So let's go to 1/300th, and we'll just knock this down to a little bit below f11. Okay, and that's really in full sun about the best you can do with 100 ISO film, because this has a relatively low maximum shutter speed. If you could get up to 1/500th, you could go down to about f5.6 or thereabouts with this camera in full sun and 100 ISO film. So we have our shutter speed and we have our aperture selected. Next thing we would do is look through the viewfinder and focus the image properly. And okay, there we go. Perfect. That is perfectly in focus. And make sure it's composed correctly. Take a look around the frame. Make sure that we're happy with the image. Take the picture and advance. And there we go. That is the process of taking a photo with the Petri CCS. So some things not to do with your camera. Don't touch the lens, don't touch the shutter, don't touch the back of the lens. If you can touch the shutter, you've taken the lens apart, and that's not something you really necessarily want to do anyway. Don't touch the rangefinder mirrors, which means also don't take that apart unless you really know what you're doing and are mechanically inclined. It's some fairly complex mechanics up there. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car, because they can be damaged by heat, and some of the oils that help keep everything lubricated and moving could make it to parts of the camera that they shouldn't and then re-solidify once it's cooled off a bit. Likewise, extreme cold can cause the lubricants to break down and congeal, and then nothing works correctly either. Don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box, because moisture will get in and it will cause fungus to grow on the lens, and it will eat up the leatherette, and it's a bad situation for your camera and will make it smell pretty terrible. Don't let your camera get wet. Even though it doesn't have any electronic components in it, moisture getting into it can cause the internal components to rust together, and that would be a pretty bad situation as well. Just remember that your Petri CCS 2.8 is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So if this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. I'm pretty good about responding fairly quickly. If you have suggestions for future videos, please let me know in the comments, and if I have the equipment and technical know-how, I'm more than happy to make those for you. If you are an amateur photographer who has taken pictures with a CCS 2.8, feel free to share the link to your album in the comments section. And one last thing. Two last things. One of them being, if you subscribe, YouTube will let you know when I release more videos about cameras and film photography. And now the last thing. Thank you guys for watching, and take great photos.